We're going to look at how to get started with mixing beats today, and if mixing seems scary to you, we're going to break that barrier today and help you get started. So congrats to you for wanting to make better music. That's what brought you here today. And so how do you mix beats? There's a lot that goes into a professional mix, so today we're just going to start with the drums. If I had to break down mixing drums into 5 parts, they would be volume, EQ, panning and effects, compression, and lastly, delay. So over in Logic Pro here we have a beat pulled up, and you might be in a similar spot with an 8 bar, 16 bar loop, or just a full beat that you're ready to mix. But I'm just going to play this through completely unmixed, no channel settings on my drums whatsoever, and we're just going to hear how it sounds. So I've got the initial beat down, and so what I want to do is first start with my volume, and there's no real order to mixing. So for me, I love to start with volume, and the easiest way to do this to get my volume levels right is to just start by soloing part of my melody. So I'm just going to have all of my melodies selected here and then start with just one piece at a time. So what I've done with my snare is just collectively thrown them through a summing stack, but on the summing stack I'm just going to start with the volume way low and then start to work that up until it fits well with the beat. That sounds pretty good to me right there, and then I'm going to start by throwing in my kick drum next and do the same thing and just work up with the volume. And continue to just add in my tracks. This is my open hat. Turn that down slightly, and I'm going to relabel this. So in this section with my bass line, I'm going to throw that in and start to work up with the volume as well. I'm going to jump forward to this section. I have the rest of my drum sounds, so I want to make sure I level those as well. So this one, for example, that can definitely be turned down a little bit. Some different hi-hats and percussion effects working together there to kind of work with the snare. But overall, I think the volume there sounds really good. Another way to adjust the volume or loudness of a sound is to open up these notes here and just adjust the velocity. So what this is going to do is actually change how the sample sounds. So if I wanted the kick drum to be higher velocity, it just means that it's going to hit the kick drum a little bit harder, so the sound will be different. So if that's the sound that you're going for, feel free to mess around with the velocities a little bit. As you can see, I have different velocities on these kick drums just for different parts of the beat. So what I've done is just have variation throughout. So this is usually 58, but on this one it drops to 22, just so it adds a little bit of fills. This step with leveling volume is the easiest way to get better at mixing, in my opinion, because you're automatically looking for ways to fit things together. So make sure not to skip this step. It is a pivotal one, and you can always come back to it later on. While we're on the topic of just cleaning things up, what I want to do is just select anything that is an audio file within my beat, and in this region drop down, just turn up the fade in and the fade out to 1. And so what this will do, as a audio file ends and it heads to the next one, there's going to be a popping sound that occurs sometimes. So in order to get rid of that, just fade in and fade out all of these audio samples. It will make no difference except to eliminate those pops. The next thing I want to move to is just start to work in some EQ to bring out frequencies in my sound. So for example, my snare drum, what I can do with that to add some brightness is just start to use these bands on the EQ to bring out some of that high end. So I'm going to keep this fairly skinny and have this band just accentuate a certain higher frequency in the sound. I can do the same thing with the low end if I think that's hitting too much. As you can actually see with these levels here, what's peaking. So this low end, I want to actually decrease that a little bit. If I wanted to take it further, you can hear how soft the snare becomes. So this is totally a matter of preference, but for me, I like to have this lower end a little bit quieter. So I could do the same thing with like my open hats here. If I wanted to have that fit in a certain range, I can just look for where the sound is. And then just increase or decrease certain frequencies, but for me, I like to increase my open hats to just create some warmth. It's like right there. That way, I don't have to mess with the volume as much. I can really just bring out a frequency to make it sit in the pocket. It's a lot of back and forth, so I actually want to decrease the volume just slightly because I've brought up that higher range. And on this percussion sound, I haven't even brought it in yet, but this is what it sounds like on its own. So what I want to do is just take that all the way down with the volume, and then throw on an EQ to just drown out some of that high end, just give it a completely new sound. So with this low pass filter that I've turned on, I'm just gonna sweep this down until I think it fits well and just create some texture. So this is really just for like headphone listeners right now. This effect itself, the sound is going to be really quiet in the mix, but it does create a little bit more of an interesting sound. So a crucial part of this process is mixing your kick and your bass together. And so just doing this with the EQ, what I want to do is on my kick track, throw on an EQ and do the same thing with my bass line. So I'm going to throw this on here and have them both pulled up at the same time. So as I'm playing them through, I've got my kick up here, my bass down here, and I'm gonna look and see where the frequencies are currently sitting. So I'm just gonna solo out my drums while I mix the kick and the bass line. So as this is playing through, I'm going to look for a frequency in my kick drum that I think sounds the best, and so I'm gonna accentuate that a little bit. So I'm just giving a little bit of a boost in that 200 range, and then the next thing I like to do is on this high pass filter is just increase this so it cuts off really sharp, and then just bring that up a little bit. This will allow the kick drum to not clash so much with the bass line in this lower frequency range. So what I'm going to do is just work my way up. That just creates a little bit more warmth, and again, what I want to do is just carve out some of this mid-range frequency in the kick. And then on my kick drum, I also like to increase some of that higher end just to create a little bit more warmth after I've carved out some of that section there. So nothing too crazy here going on. And then with my bass line, what I also like to do is just find where my kick drum is hitting and then start to decrease in that section so that my bass line and my kick drum have their own pocket. They're working together and they're not clashing so much. And then just bring out a little bit that lower end in the bass. Do the same thing, just increase a little bit of that high range. So for headphone listeners, they can hear the bass line a little more clearly. So that can really depend on what sample you're using, but I think between the kick and the bass line, those sound good. If I removed the EQs from both of them, this is how it sounds. Throw that EQ on. And then I'm just going to drop the volume of the bass a bit. So those sit way better together now. I think that sounds way more clear. So when it comes to your kick and your bass line, make sure that you're working specifically between the two to have certain ranges that each one can sit comfortably in. With my volume and my EQs in order, now I want to move on to my panning and just adding more of a spatial sound to my beat. And so ways I can do this is, for example, on my snare drum, what I often like to do is just decrease this panning to the left a little bit. So this is going to have its own little pocket. If I just move that way further left, I can just exaggerate that effect. But for me, I really just like to add this little bit of panning on certain effects. So my open hats, for example, I can move those more to the right. So that sits more on the right side, my snares on the left. Each of them have their own distinct place within my beat, and so I can just continue down the line. And let's move on to one of these sounds here. So I think a cool effect I can add to this is a tremolo, and what this will do is just move your sound left and right. So in this modulation tab, go to tremolo here. So the rate will control how fast the sound moves left to right, and the depth will control how much. So I'm gonna set this to about 1 bar in the depth. I'm gonna cut that in half to about 50 and just see how this sounds on its own. So now the sound is moving left to right, and when I mix that in with the rest of my drums here, it's really just small changes like this with spacing that can stand out and make a difference in the quality of your beats. I like to also just select certain sounds within my beat and mess with the delay. So for this snare drum, I have all these layers, so I'm gonna select all of them. On my delay here in the region drop down, I'm gonna either decrease this or increase it. And I usually stick between -1 plus 1 to 10. That's usually a good threshold. You don't really wanna delay things too much so that they sound out of line, but this is gonna help create more of a realistic effect with your drums. So once I've decreased the delay by -10, that fits pretty well, but if I added 10 ticks of delay, I can also apply this to other sounds. So for example, these open hats, if I want those to be a little bit more delayed, let's see how that sounds. So this is just going to add to the realism of your beats, so it's not going to sound as robotic, not going to sound like an AI. The final plugin I wanted to show you real quick is this direction mixer inside the imaging tab. So let's say on my snare drum here, it's a little bit wide to start. What I can do with the direction mixer is decrease the spread. So it's going to move the sound more towards the middle. If I turn that off, you can hear that sounds a little bit more wide, and so that direction mixer can really help with spacing of certain sounds. So I highly recommend using that as a stock one. Okay, so now I want to move into some compression, and simply put, you can use compression come and go as you wish, but for me, on my snare drum, for example, if I threw on this default stock compressor, I can start to work with this, and I really want to keep it minimal, but it will just create more of a gritty sound and ultimately balance out the leveling a little bit better. And really just tweak the taste from here. So my release, if I wanted that higher or lower, I can adjust that, and then ultimately the output gain will control the volume. Move straight into my kick drum to show you another example. Kind of do the same thing. Keep the ratio low in the attack. I'm going to turn that down as well as the release. And so I'm going to keep that on and just keep these effects pretty minimal for now. And so on my kick track here, what I want to do is just send this to like a random bus. So bus 91 today. On this knob here, I want to just increase this all the way up, or if I wanted to hit option click, that'll just take it straight to 0. But if I turn up this bus, I'm gonna have to turn down the volume a little bit on the kick. It will automatically increase with the bus. So up in this melody track, I'm gonna throw on this compressor, and in the top right in the side chain, drop down, I'm gonna find that bus for the kick drum, and then as I play this through, I'm gonna turn this to graph. You'll actually see where the melody will duck when the kick drum hits. So as this plays through, I'm gonna just watch and see what happens. So the effect is pretty minimal right now. So what I want to do is just decrease the ratio slightly, as well as the threshold. And on the attack, I'm going to make that a little quicker, as well as the release just slightly. Again, you can see where when the kick drum hits, the melody is going to duck. So this is a really simple way to add clarity to your mix. Let's say I wanted this to be applied to all of my melody tracks. I can select everything here, create a track stack, summing stack, and on this summing stack, I'll just go ahead and throw that compressor. And I can work again with the compressor settings to accentuate that effect if I wanted to. And so at this point, this is where mixing gets fun. You can just start to add in different reverbs, delays, different effects to just create more of that spatial sound and just to add some different elements to your mix. I would recommend throwing on some sort of limiting on your master output so that when you have your beat that's in a good place, you think the mix sounds good, throw it through a limiter just so you can hear kind of how it sounds as a radio ready finished product. Now just make sure to keep the gain pretty light. So what I'm going to do from here is continue to mix my beat, go through all the steps that we've went through in this tutorial, and just start to fine tune. Make sure that you have reference tracks so you have something to compare to once you're finished. That can also help you identify changes quickly. After you are done with a mix, always go test on different devices, so headphones, car speakers, your little brother's phone. Ultimately, the end goal is to just make things sound as good as possible. So that's it for this video, guys. If you liked it, go below this video, hit that like, sub button if you want to see more. Until the next one, keep making music. I'll see you guys. Peace out.